Hi guys, welcome back. We're now starting with a new topic in AS, and that is international trade. International trade questions you can usually find in both 8 markers and 12 markers, and they also are tested in the case study section A as well. As far as the syllabus is concerned, we need to know about what is absolute and comparative advantage, which forms, and here the comparative advantage is primarily it forms the basis of the international trade, the theory of David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. We learn about, we're going to be looking at this concept with numerical examples, and we'll also learn what the trading possibility curve is. You need to also know what the terms of trade is, but we'll cover terms of trade later on when we will be doing the balance of payment and exchange rate, because I need to first go through the BOP so that I can actually after that would be a right time to teach terms of trade, so that you know especially when we are talking about the impacts and the causes and the changes and all of that. So it's you'll better be able to understand once you have covered BOP and current account and all of that. Then primarily we're going to be focusing our discussions for the next few videos on the what is international trade, what are the pros and cons of free trade, what are trade barriers, tariffs, quota, especially the diagram for tariffs is very important. What are trade barriers, arguments for and against international trade. I've also attached a few past paper questions from our own website. You can have a look at them in the digital notes file so that you have an idea what sort of questions are coming from this topic. Now guys, as far as international trade is concerned, see, we talked about domestic trade and demand and supply, where trade is done domestically, but you know that trade isn't always done domestically based on just domestic demand and domestic supply. Trade could be also based on international demand by foreign governments or foreign firms or foreign residents, foreign individuals on our goods and services. We studied that under open economy and circular flow exports, which is actually export revenue. So international trade, but then international trade is not just exports. I mean, it could be imports as well. That is, we could demand imported goods. We, as in we individuals, residents, households of of the country, or our governments or the firms. So international trade, guys, refers to the exchange of goods and services between countries, that is across borders, that involves both import and export. That's the key definition. And see, and the idea of international trade simply has to do with, like, instead of producing everything yourself, or instead of countries producing everything themselves, let's say instead of Pakistan producing everything themselves, then countries, instead of doing everything themselves, they would specialize. This is where countries specialize. See, when we started economics, I taught you guys that firms specialize in what they're best. Workers specialize in what they're best at doing. Firms also specialize in producing those goods that they're best at making, right? I mean, for example, let's say I have specialized in economics, I being a firm, let's say a service provider, right? So again, countries also do that, and you learn about and you've also seen might have come across MCQs as well, which looks like opportunity cost MCQs, and they sort of talk about countries specializing, right? So that is actually part of international trade, and you'll be learning those as well. So instead of countries producing everything themselves, countries specialize in what they are relatively better at producing, and then they trade with other countries. Instead of Pakistan producing each and everything itself, it would focus on, David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage said that we should instead focus on things that we should specialize in, those things that we are good at making, or relatively good at making, which means that in which we have a lower opportunity cost. And I'll teach you that when we come to when that time comes, that we are relatively better at producing, and then trade it with those countries that are producing those things that they are relatively better at producing. And in this way, both countries benefit, right? So for example, and we know that's why we know that Pakistan focuses our exports are comprised of textiles and, let's say, rice, right? Let's say Pakistan specializes in textiles and rice. Well, what does Germany specialize in? Germany specializes in automobiles, exports cars and machinery across the world. Saudi Arabia exports oil. So, the fundamental economic reason, guys, for international trade is actually comparative advantage. And we'll study comparative advantage later on, but it simply means that the theory of comparative advantage teaches us that even if a country is better at producing everything, and when we say that a country is better at producing everything, it means that it has an absolute advantage in that. Let's say it is better at producing both good A and both good B than as compared to another country. It has an absolute advantage over both goods because it can produce it better or in more quantity, which means, but that doesn't mean that it has a comparative advantage as well, because comparative advantage is a totally different thing. So David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage teaches countries. It was a theory where it taught countries that they should focus their resources and specialization on those goods that they could produce at a lower opportunity cost. What that means simply is that they should produce those goods, they should specialize in those goods in which they have a lower opportunity cost, in which they have a comparative advantage. Now, we are not studying comparative advantage right now. When we come to that topic, which is part of this chapter only, when we come to that video, you will automatically know what I'm trying to say, and I'll teach you over there how comparative advantage theory works, and right. Uh, but what you need to understand is that even if a country is better at producing everything, that doesn't mean that it actually produces everything. I could probably teach economics, business, and accounts much better than, let's say, 10 other people, but that doesn't mean I start teaching everything. Maybe I should partner with someone who is better at teaching, let's say, business, while I am better at teaching economics, and I should specialize in economics only, while that other guy should specialize in business only, right? Similarly, countries, even if countries are better at producing everything, that doesn't mean that they don't internationally trade. They can't say, country A says, oh, there's no point in trading with country B because whatever country B makes, all of it we can make it better, or some of it we can make it, much better. But comparative advantage teaches us, you'll study that later on, that, okay, fine, you might have an absolute advantage in both of those goods. You can make in more quantity than the other country both those goods, but that doesn't mean that you produce both, that you don't indulge in international trade. It will teach us, and we'll see how that works. What David Ricardo said, that in this way, if both countries individually focus on just in what they have a comparative advantage in just in what they have a comparative advantage in, which is they only focus their production on those goods that they could produce at a lower opportunity cost. Now, what it means that they could produce at a lower opportunity cost, it is not the topic of this video right now. So he said that both countries will gain in that way. Both countries will be able to produce more and consume more. Yes, produce more and consume more if they indulge in international trade. The post-trade position, where they import and export goods from each other, will be much better than the pre-trade position, before trade position. So trading is beneficial based on comparative advantage. We learned this, right? So even if you have an absolute advantage in both the goods as compared to other countries, it still benefits you by specializing in the good where the opportunity cost is lower, right? It still benefits you by specializing in the good where the opportunity cost of producing that good is much lower as compared to the other country. And focus on the good in which you have a competitive advantage, produce that good, specialize in that good, go all in, all out, lock yourself in for that good in which you have a competitive advantage, and the other country locks himself in for the good in which he has a competitive advantage while you don't have a competitive advantage in, and you lock yourself in for the good that you have a competitive advantage in, and you export it to the other country based on a favorable exchange ratio, and he exports you the good that he is not producing based on a mutually favorable exchange ratio. And what those exchange ratio is, what is a mutually favorable exchange ratio, we'll all study it under the topic of comparative advantage, which is part of this chapter. But for now, for the coming content of this chapter, for this video, you must understand that comparative advantage is a theory that teaches countries that instead of being self-sufficient in everything, or even if you have an absolute advantage in more goods as compared to the other country, and you can produce all these goods better than the other country or more in quantity than the other country, you should still focus on goods in which you have a competitive advantage that you can produce at lower opportunity cost and then indulge in international trade, you will definitely be in a much better position. The post-trade position will be much better. And one of the benefits that this theory teaches us, that is international trade teaches us. Simply remember that what is international trade teaching us? International trade teaches countries that their own people, their own firms, their own governments will be able to consume beyond their PPC, which means that, PPC, what was PPC? PPC was the production possibility boundary. So, for example, the maximum that I can produce, let's say, whatever the maximum that I can produce, if I produce X myself and Y myself, let's say I could maybe produce this much X with this much Y, right? But this is what I could produce myself, both the goods, right? And this is what I can consume as well. I can consume 10x and produce 10x. I can produce 10x and consume 10x and produce 10y and consume 10y. But you learn that international trade will teach you that maybe you should just focus on X, and instead of producing Y, you should import Y from another country based on a mutually beneficial trade ratio. In that way, not only will you be able to produce more of X by specializing in X, because right now this is the only maximum that you can make for X. That is, let's say if all is invested in X, then only 20X you can make. But after specializing in X based on competitive advantage, you will be able to make maybe 40X instead of just 20X. And in that way, maybe you could, export some of X. Let's say you could, when you end up making 40X, you could end up exporting 10x to the other country. So you are still left with 30x, and you could import, let's say, 10y from another country. So your post-trade position is like you are consuming 30x and you're consuming 10y. Before you were only goddamn producing 10 simple x and you were producing and consuming 10y. But now you're still consuming 10y while you're producing goddamn 40x. Look how much employment you're generating. And you're still consuming more x, right? So your post-trade position, and this is just the basics. I mean, we look at the proper math for this and everything. So you just don't worry about that, right? But what is international trade teaching you? Simply that you end up consuming more than what you produce. That is, you end up consuming more than your own goddamn productive capacity. I mean, you can't really consume more than what you can produce, right? But by internationally trading, you do end up consuming more than you produce, because obviously you consume because you specialize and you end up producing more. And then even after exporting some of it, you still have a lot more left to consume for your own economy. And in return, you import a lot from the other economy. So you both are benefiting in that way. And what's working for you, the same concept is working for them as well. So both are gaining. And you're able to access goods, and even a lot of goods you can't make yourself. You're not good at making yourself. So you'll be able to access goods not available domestically. And this will also improve efficiency through global competition. This is again a very big basis. The world efficiency will improve if everyone specializes in what they're best at doing, and resources will flow to cost-effective countries that can produce goods based on lower cost than your own country producing at an inefficient cost. Resources will flow to those countries which can produce it at a much lower cost. And this is how global trade would work. Then the world efficiency would increase. And I'll come explain this point later on in this video as well, because I'll come to each individual benefits in more detail. So remember, guys, at the very core of international trade, is about specialization, it's about efficiency, improving world efficiency, and it is about mutual gains from exchange. See, you trading, you producing everything at a very high cost. I mean, you don't have the resources. Maybe your labor cost is so high, your utility, your expense, your bijli, your electricity, your gas, utilities is so high, and then let other countries who are much better than producing at a cost effective way, let goddamn them produce. By why are you producing it? In that way, resources will flow to cost effective, efficient countries. So world efficiency improves. So like I said, at the very core of international trade is about specialization, about efficiency, and mutual gains from exchange, from international trade. Right. Another thing that you first, before you move on to the benefits of international trade, because this video we will be discussing the benefits of international trade. As you can see in this question, look at the question. Assess the potential benefits of free trade. Now, free trade is, we are talking about international trade here. Trade without trade barriers like tariffs and quotas outweigh the arguments. Now, you see these questions like, another question says the extent to which the consequences of free trade is always positive, right? Now, so what exactly is free trade? What is free trade? Free trade is about international trade, or you countries exporting and importing. That international trade is being conducted without any government imposed restrictions, or without any state imposed restrictions, without trade barriers such as tariffs. We've seen the US China trade war, and we've seen, how the United States is very aggressive at imposing tariffs on China, right? So, without these are called trade barriers. Why do countries impose trade barriers? Again, this is the topic of our following videos in this chapter. So we'll be looking at these trade barriers individually, like tariffs, quotas, export subsidies, where there are various trade barriers: tariff, quota, export subsidy, import bans, excessive regulations, and the tariff being the most important, especially in terms of diagram as well. So, guys, and then you must also know the concept of trade liberalization. So usually you see free trade is just zero trade barriers, while trade liberalization means that you have some trade barriers, but now you're moving towards a more open economy. Like, open economy means a more freer trade, right? So you're allowing more freer trade by reducing your trade barriers, by moving the economy towards a more freer trade region, or towards a more free trade zone, or towards a more free trade economy, simply by becoming a more and more open economy. So that's what liberalizing your trade actually means, trade liberalization. Guys, now we are now going to be moving towards the benefits of free trade. That is, what are the benefits if economies do not impose trade barriers, if they allow free trade? What are the benefits? And then we'll study what are the problems associated with allowing completely free trade. Now, guys, we're going to be moving towards the benefits of free trade. And when we talk about free trade, we're not just talking about countries buying and selling goods. We are talking about how removing trade barriers like tariffs and quotas, allow the global markets, or the world markets, the mechanism of the global markets to operate efficiently across borders, right? And you see, the first and the foremost advantage of, and this is a very important advantage, that international trade, or let's say free trade, or trade without trade barriers, like trade without tariffs. And because tariffs are taxes on imports, right? And quotas are, you're limiting the size and the quantity of imports entering in your country. So trade without these barriers would definitely lead to an increase in the world efficiency, or global efficiency, right? Because you have to understand that when free trade exists, right, countries specialize according to comparative advantage, meaning that they produce the goods they can produce at the lowest opportunity cost, right? That's what comparative advantage was, which we will obviously be studying later. But for now, you can just understand and just learn that countries specialize based on comparative advantage, meaning that they produce where they will have the lowest opportunity cost, they will produce those goods. But okay, fine, what does this actually mean? See, what it means is that when they will do that, like, imagine all countries doing that, like all countries in this global map, let's say, or most of the countries doing that, and then trading, these lines are showing that they're trading internationally with each other, right? So this is representing the world, right? So I mean, what it does is, it means that global resources, as in, what do you mean by global resources? Global resources as in land, capital, labor, are allocated to their most productive uses. Well, that makes sense, because you see, instead of every country in the world, trying to sort of produce everything inefficiently, I mean, countries would focus on what they do best and they will end up trading for the rest, meaning that they will produce what they can produce in the best possible way. So they will do what they are best at doing. That's what specialization is, country special level specialization. And then they'll trade with what they cannot produce. They'll end up trading those goods with other countries that they're not good at producing themselves, right? And what is the result? The result would be, which is very, very important, the result would be that it would result in a higher total world output. World output will increase because, imagine these countries producing everything themselves and not indulging into an international trade. So the world output, and if you add up the output of all these countries in the world, it would definitely go up after international trade. So the global output rises, right? And that results into greater global or world efficiency. There's great, because resources are allocated efficiently, there's greater allocative efficiency, and we're talking about global allocative efficiency. And it's not necessary that you mention the word allocative efficiency, but yes, you should mention greater world efficiency. That would be equally be acceptable. There's no point, or I mean, there's no need, an absolute need to mention the allocative efficiency word. I'm just saying that overall world efficiency goes up. That would be good enough. So, in simple terms, guys, what we're saying is that the world ends up producing, the whole world, the entire globe ends up producing more using the same amount of resources, and that is a gain. But why is this happening? Why are they able to achieve that advantage or that scale of advantage? Because I mean, it's representing a gain in efficiency. So they're able to do that through international trade because they're specializing in what they're best at doing and then trading with the rest, trading the rest with other countries who are specializing in what they are best at doing. Both gain, and if the world does that, then the world gains, right? So number one, rise in global output, world output, very scoring point. Rise in world efficiency, very scoring point as well. The second advantage is larger economies of scale, and economies of scale is a simple word that simply means a lower average cost, that is a lower cost per unit. So it average cost, which is cost per unit. And because you see, what happens is that under free trade, firms are no longer restricted to small domestic markets. So let's say you have a country here, it's not just producing, it's not just producing, in the domestic market itself. So firms are no longer restricted to small domestic markets. They now have access to sort of international markets, right? I mean, to much larger international markets, and which means that when firms would produce for a larger market, then overall output for that firm as well would increase. And if everyone does that, then global output goes up. Okay, fine. But when firms produce for larger markets, output goes up, and that results into lower average cost for firms. And right, so cost per unit goes up because firms are producing or scaling up their output because now they are targeting international markets, right? So that results into a lower cost per unit, and that results into economies of scale, right? And that is enough for you to know this much at this point, that because they're scaling up their output, that results into a lower average cost, that is a lower cost per unit, and it results into a benefit known as economies of scale. If you want to go a line further, you can say that it results into, since because lower average cost means it would improve productive efficiency. You can say that, also not an absolute necessity, but you can say that it would improve productive efficiency. And productive efficiency on a firm level means that you're producing at the lowest possible cost. So it would improve productive efficiency, meaning that goods by those firms would be produced at the lowest possible cost. And then obviously, if the cost is lower, it means prices for consumers are lower, and then lower cost would often translate into lower prices for consumers. So that will benefit consumers, and that would result into higher consumer surplus. Cool, right? So remember that small economies, now hear this out, that small economies especially benefit at this point and for this point, because small economies in small countries would especially benefit from this point, because you see, without trade they may never be able to reach at producing output to such a global scale that their cost per unit starts falling, because initially they were just producing for their own country and selling in their own country. Now they're accessing, let's say they're selling to maybe 10 more countries international globally, right? So small economies would and this is an engine of growth, engine of rise in real GDP for small economies, a hope for to recover from recessions. The small economies would benefit from this because without trade, they may never be able to reach this level of scale and lower average cost. So that's good for small economies, right? Number three that you can say is that free trade, trade without trade barriers, or trade opening up, focusing on more freer trade will increase competition and lower prices for consumers. So why? Because what happens is that when markets open up internationally, domestic firms can no longer behave comfortably like local monopolies. So let's say if you're just selling your product in Pakistan and you're a domestic firm in Pakistan, maybe you're a monopoly in your own country, and you're a dominant firm where you're just exploiting consumers by overcharging them and charging very high prices because demand for your product is inelastic. But the moment you also get international orders, because now the government has freed up trade and you can import and export, so definitely you get international access. So when markets open up internationally, when they open up, so domestic firms can no longer behave comfortably like local monopolies, so they now face foreign competition, and that foreign competition results into two types of competition. It results into, number one, competition based on price, so we're going to call that price competition, and it results into quality competition, quality based competition. So both these competitions are enough for domestic firms to keep them in line, right? So this forces these domestic firms to, number one, cut costs. It forces domestic firms to improve their own efficiencies. It forces them to innovate themselves. And as competition increases, again, prices fall, quality improves, and consumer choice expands. Consumer welfare rises, living standards would rise in the economy. A lot of students will end up writing in the exam, especially when the questions are coming for 12 markers, that when competition increases, prices would get lower. But they're not elaborating on it. They're not establishing the proper chain of analysis. So you can't just say, oh, you know what, competition goes up, prices go down. Okay, fine. Just elaborate a bit why and how is this beneficial for consumers and why is this happening? Okay. Also, when prices are falling, then consumers would gain through higher real income, because when prices fall in the economy for goods and services, because now you've opened up, because you see, if you open a freer trade, prices across the economy for different goods and services would fall because of competition, you can say. We're looking at this from an intuitive way, when we're not just looking at it from an inflationary perspective, but we're just saying that prices in general for goods and services would go down, and that would definitely result into higher real incomes, because now consumers' money goes further in buying a lot more goods. So and so that's again a benefit, right? And at the same time, remember that because now your domestic firms are facing international competition, so all those inefficient, lazy firms that were just not really bothered because they used to act like kings in the domestic markets, the moment they face international competition, I mean, inefficient firms would exit the market, meaning that resources are automatically reallocated towards productive industries. So, automatically, productive industries or efficient industries just remain and sustain over the long run. And that's again another way of saying that world efficiency improves, because the moment you open up borders for international goods to move in and out of your country, that means that your domestic firms need to be efficient, and if they're not, then they're forced out automatically, meaning that it improves, the resources are reallocated towards more efficient and productive industries so the world resources are reallocated towards more productive and efficient industries, and that just improves overall efficiency for the world. Global efficiency goes up. Also, guys, there's more increased choice for consumers and businesses, meaning that free trade sort of expands the range of goods available for consumers, because now your business was just selling a particular range in the domestic market, was selling a particular range of goods for consumers, but now, since you also have imported firms in the country and you're also importing goods, consumer goods, and consumers are allowed to import, in fact. So you might have retailers selling imported goods, and let's say, even for online on an online platform. So consumers now have access to different brands, higher quality products, and also cheaper imported alternatives. And that's good for consumers, because, and it's not just good for consumers, guys. Just don't look at it from a very narrow perspective. Also understand, this is also good for businesses. Why? Because now businesses import raw materials, so they have now access to cheaper raw materials initially. Because you see, in, let's say, in our country, energy costs are high, raw material prices are high, so because of higher taxes and poor subsidies, so all of that, so that contributes to a very high cost of production. But now businesses can import cheaper raw material, because before they could not, because the trade wasn't that free, or it wasn't at all. So now they can import cheaper raw material, which means, or not only that, they could access better efficient machinery, or more technologically advanced machinery. They could access that. So they could use advanced technology, import advanced technology from abroad, and that reduces production costs, and it improves profitability of the firms as well. And for consumers, this is very beneficial as well, because this translates into more choice, translates into higher living standards, greater, you know, material and non-material living standards, more material welfare for them. And I mean, just have access to innovative goods and services. So trade isn't just trade in, I mean, you're not, I mean, when you're saying trade increases quantity, I mean, it doesn't just increases the quantity of the goods, but it also increases variety and quality. Plus there's a big economic advantage, because when you're trading, and let's say you're exporting more than what you're importing, and your net exports are positive, so that's a very important thing. Because, and plus, export revenues are a component of AD. So when countries specialize and they export more, so export revenues goes up. And let's assume that imports are not rising as much as exports are. So net exports are positive, so net exports are increasing, and this raises AD, and it stimulates economic growth. It's a reason why economies would, it could become a reason why economies could come out of recessions. It could be very important factor in generating employment and higher real GDP, because economic growth leads to higher national income and higher real GDP, and it leads to lower unemployment, especially lower cyclical or demand deficit unemployment, since we know that labor demand is derived from the output demand. And plus, higher GDP would also mean higher tax revenue. The government could end up paying some of its debts. It could also spend that tax money on the economy for more transfer payment, better welfare programs, for essential public services, again, improving living standards for the economy. So, yes, it is a sign. Economic growth, exports are definitely a sign, an engine of economic growth. We cannot deny that, right? And plus, all those economies that are dependent on exports, or that are dependent on international trade, definitely exports are definitely a sign of economic growth. So, and also you could say that in the long run, free trade can also increase uh, potential GDP. It's not just short term AD based economic growth or AD shift economic growth. I mean, it could also, I mean, free trade can also result in productive, I mean, the PPC could shift outward, or LRAS could shift outwards. Your potential GDP could go up, because trade is giving an incentive or a reason for firms to innovate and invest in technology, and invest for and invest in capital accumulation, and that would result into an outward shift in PPC, also mirrored by an LRAS shift into the right. Potential GDP rises, and so free trade can stimulate both short term, or sorry, I mean, free trade can stimulate both immediate demand side growth, and the long run supply side growth as well. In the last, guys, you can say that faster rates of technology, I mean, like, free trade exposes countries to new technology, new production techniques. It exposes countries to more FDI. FDI means foreign, United down, foreign direct investment. Because once you have free trading, it gives you access to international markets, and because of free trade, maybe countries could realize that maybe we could just end up setting our operations in that other country. It's not just about importing goods and services. Then after that, after the phase that you're importing goods and services from abroad, just like let's say let's say Apple decides to come to Pakistan and start its operations in Pakistan, because obviously Pakistan imports iPhones and MacBooks and Apple products. Apple might realize that might not just come to Pakistan and produce phones here and then start exporting from Pakistan to other places. Maybe we could leverage some of the resources Pakistan has. So uh, it gives an exposure to FDI, foreign direct, and this is actually Apple coming to Pakistan as FDI, foreign direct investment, where multinationals invest in your country. That's what it is. So free trade exposes countries to managerial expertise from other countries, right? So because of that free, when you're saying that free trade exposes countries, because initially you were let's say locked just in your country. I mean, you couldn't really leverage other countries' technologies. You couldn't really export and import from them. So you were like just producing domestically, selling domestically to domestic consumers. That's all. But free trade exposes countries. So it's not so free trade exposes countries to new technologies, new production techniques, foreign direct investment, managerial expertise, all these 4 points I mentioned. I mean, in the exam, obviously, you don't need to write all four or go into a lot more detail, but since you're studying it, you must be aware that how this mechanism and process is working. Helps in MCQs as well. So, technology, always remember that technology spreads much faster in an open economy rather than a closed economy. And we know the benefit of technology. It results in LRAS shifting, PPC shifting, potential growth. We all have studied, how technology could have an long-term productive impact on the economy. And most importantly, even domestic firms, they learn from foreign competitors. I mean, look at the learning that will happen. Look at the learning curve. So domestic firms will learn from foreign competitors. They adopt better production methods. They innovate themselves. They will have to innovate themselves to survive. Otherwise, they would be forced out of. I mean, the international competition would force them out. They would just not be able to survive. They would have to shut down. So this just results into more. This just results into the domestic firms being more competitive, which is good for them. It's good for their own long-term survival. So, I mean, in terms of growth potential for a country, yes, it can. Free trade does result into enhanced growth potential, economic growth potential, both short-term and long-term growth for the country. But I mean, just because you see a lot of advantages, like, oh wow, come on, man, these free trade are just like just so. I mean, you just have winners here, but that's not true. I mean, some stakeholders do certainly win. I mean, even for producers, they are winners, but not all producers are winners. Some would lose because foreign competition would definitely threaten. That's why Donald Trump has been so aggressive in imposing tariffs throughout the world, because their own manufacturing sector and their own domestic industries are suffering because they're threatened from foreign competition, especially from China. So, what you're saying, guys, over here is that you have to understand that overall, yes. So, firstly, overall, from an efficiency perspective, free trade increases global welfare, increases global efficiency, increases world efficiency, increases global output, increases overall living standards in the world, and it allows the world economy. And not only that, I mean, free trade allows the world economies. I mean, if we are assuming here that countries freely trade with each other, but if countries do freely trade with each other, if not all countries, but still, if countries do end up freely trading with each other, it allows the world economies to operate closer to its full potential. I mean, the world economies, or I mean, the world economy doesn't necessarily here means that every damn country in the world. I mean, whatever the country we're talking about, let's say country A versus country B. So if they both are trading freely, let's say, then they would free trade would allow them to operate closer to its full potential. If you have a negative output gap, let's say, because exports will rise, AD will rise, that will close the negative output gap. And how does that work? What do you mean by close? What does Adil say? Closing the negative output gap. How that works, we've already studied in the ADS model. So okay, fine. Yeah, free trade does creates winners, but it also creates losers. And who's the biggest loser? Some domestic, not all, but some domestic industries may shrink and may end up closing down, shutting down. And if they close and shut down because of competition threats, then structural unemployment will result. And structural unemployment, to overcome structure, I mean, structurally, because I mean, maybe some weak, high cost small firms might not be able to survive the foreign competition, and they would end up shutting their operations down, and that's bad for them. And you know and adjustment to structural unemployment takes time. It's not an easy process. So that's all, guys, for this video. We're done, and we're going to be next we're going to be starting with trade protection, and we also need to cover in detail about, the drawbacks of free trade. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.